Welcome class to chapter 5. This will be on human population growth. This is a great video. So when you download the PowerPoints from Canvas, you can watch all the embedded videos on your own. But this is a really interesting video showing how the world's population has changed since about, what is this, year 100. So I would encourage you to take a look at this video and you'll see especially how in recent years, the world's population has increased dramatically. So these are some of the focus questions that we're really going to look at. We're going to look at population trends, factors that account for differences that exist among countries, and what are factors that influenced human population over time. How can we slow growth to ensure a sustainable future? This is really where the environment comes into play. A lot of people are concerned with human population becoming too great that the environment wouldn't be able to support it. So as of autumn 2011, there were about 7 billion humans on Earth. There's rapid population growth going on, and some say this is the source of all problems because humans are detrimental to the world. So they're saying if humans are increasing greatly, everything will go downhill. So this is a look at the average life expectancy of the 10 poorest nations versus the wealthiest nations. The average number of children born to a woman in her lifetime in Niger, which is a country in Africa, versus a woman in the US. And then just some other factoids that you can see here. 5 Earths are needed to support the world's population if everyone lived like we do, because in North America, we're such a consumerist society. And that's true. You can go on Amazon Prime and get something delivered to your house in a day or two. It's amazing how consumeristic we've become. So this is, again, look at how the population has increased, and especially it's increased greatly, exponentially, just in the past 200 or 300 years, pretty much since the Industrial Revolution. So this is how countries kind of rate in terms of their population size relative to the world. Here's the number of people the world can sustainably support. That's kind of the major question. How many people can the world support sustainably with enough resources that exist? The size of human population by 2050 is predicted to be about 9.5 to 10 billion, and that's projected by the UN. So a little bit of history of the human population. I'll let you guys read this. Pretty much what these next few slides go over, and you'll see, is how human population has traveled and how people have immigrated throughout the course of the world, and also how human population really increased slowly until pretty recently throughout the history of the world. And that's because the birth rate equaled the death rate, and there wasn't this exponential growth until recently because of medical advances, food advances, and we're able to support more life now. Here's a look at population density. So you can see where the most densely populated countries are. You can see here, Mexico is a little more densely populated, but if you look over here at India and China and Korea, extremely densely populated. So this takes you through the history of human population, the periods of growth from the pre-agricultural period to the agricultural period, which includes the domestication of plants and animals. That just means this is when people started growing plants for food and breeding animals for food as well, or other trading items. Then the industrial period with all the technology advances, the sanitation, the medicine. This is really when we had an extreme period of growth, and this is our current period where the population is about 7 billion. So this is a look at the growth periods, the pre-agriculture period, agriculture, and then we're in the industrial period. And really the use of sanitation, medical care, vaccinations is what has allowed the world's population to increase so exponentially. Demography is not destiny. So the UN, you can read through this, they collect data for 195 countries of the world. And they're just trying to say here that your human behavior driven by your cultural values and social policy can dramatically change a country or population trajectories. Many times in Africa, where there aren't a lot of women's rights or any sort of birth control mechanisms, you see a really highly increased rate in growth in those countries versus first world countries. The UN is just saying that doesn't have to be the case. The Sustainable Development Goals, several of them have to do with growth and population. Number 3, ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. So this would be, you can see the goals underneath 3 are to lower that population growth rate to be able to give services for everyone. The 4th SDG is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. This is especially true in third world countries to ensure that girls and women are getting education about birth control, also giving them an opportunity to continue on in their schooling. Many women in these cultures are having kids by the time they're 14 or 15, and they'll have 6 to 8 kids in their lifetime. Here's a look at the demographic transition model, which shows as a society advances, human population growth goes through different stages: a pre-transition stage, a mortality transition stage, a fertility transition, and a stability transition. And it's the UN's goal that every country gets to the stability transition, where the birth and death rates are equal, so there's 0 or negative population growth. And these are the 4 stages showing how the total population increases during the stages and then levels off in the stability stage. These next couple slides look at Niger, a country in Africa, and the Netherlands, and it shows how throughout the course of their history, what stage they were in. So Niger, with high death and fertility rates, was in this first stage through about 1975 due to poor nutrition, bad health care. The Netherlands was out of this stage by the beginning of the 1800s. So just to show 2 extremes in 2 countries as they move through these stages. The mortality transition stage this is when the infant mortality rate decreases. The Niger didn't reach this stage until the 1970s, and the Netherlands were in this stage back in 1800 due to modern medicine, public health, and agricultural gains. The fertility transition stage, Niger hasn't gotten there yet. Fertility transition has to do with educating women to use birth control or families in order to have kids that they're able to sustain or take care of. Netherlands reached this in the late 1960s, and you can see Niger has completely dropped off at this point. They haven't reached this stage. And then the stability transition, the UN projection is that the Netherlands will reach complete 0 growth rate by 2030, and they project that Niger will still be growing rapidly in 2100. So this is a look at Niger. Look at the birth rate and death rate. And this is a look at the Netherlands, looking at their birth rate and death rate and how they're starting to become equal in the stability transition stage. So what is a birth rate? The age-specific birth rate are births per 1,000 women of an age group per year. You should know what that definition is. It's usually influenced by your wealth, your age. So this is a look at the birth rates, percentages in different countries in the world and how it relates to the GDP, which is how we measure wealth of countries. So you can see here, it's inversely, the greater the birth rates or number of children born, the lower GDP level. So primarily the countries that have the lowest GDP, that are the poorest, are having the highest birth rates. Death rates are also influenced by wealth, because if you're wealthier, you have access to better nutrition, usually cleaner water. Infant mortality rate is the percentage of infants that die before age 1, and this is also reduced with wealth because they're able to provide better pre-postnatal care. So this is a look at a woman looking at poor and wealthy in age class of women and their age-specific birth rates. So you can see obviously how the age-specific birth rate decreases the wealthier you get, meaning you're just having fewer kids. Here's a look at the world's wealthiest and the world's poorest nations versus the total fertility rate, which is the births per women. And you can just see here that on average, the world's poorest nations are having many more kids than the world's wealthiest nations. Death rates have to do with survivorship and life expectancy. The survivorship is the number of years members of a specific group live. due to wealth and your gender, and life expectancy has the same factor effects. The United States life expectancy is about 77 for men. Girls are a little higher. Globally, it's about 45 and 68 in the last 5 decades. So here's a look at the death rate. Whether it's a poor or wealthy nation, the death rate has decreased significantly, but obviously, as you can see here, in the poor nations, they have a higher death rate. World's wealthiest, world's poorest nations, showing the 2 comparisons of infant mortality. The poorer nations could have a higher infant mortality rate because they are also having more infants, but generally they will have a higher infant mortality rate because of the lack of health care. And here's a look at surviving to age and based on the age class. So this is just showing how Niger males and Niger females, this gives them the percentage or the percentage that they will survive to a particular age, depending on how old they are at the time. Here's a look at the life expectancy of birth. It's obviously higher here for wealthier nations. It is good to see that poor nations is rising. Back in 1950, only 35 life expectancy for poor nations. So thankfully, due to vaccinations and healthcare, it has risen significantly. There's still a huge gap there between poor and wealthy nations. Age structure and age structure pyramids. These pyramids graphically display age structure, and the shape will indicate the rate of population growth. So here we have the population at the bottom of males and females of a country in Africa, Ethiopia. And it's showing that there are more children in the lower age brackets, and there's fewer in the much higher age brackets. And that's because you have lots of babies being born, but you have a low life expectancy, so there aren't many living to be a certain age. The United States is a more rectangular shaped. So you have lots of babies being born, but you have about the same number of middle or median aged in the population. You still have less extremely old folks, but that's because most people only live to about 70, 80 anyway. And then Italy, you can see the Italy age structure as well, where the majority of the population are in the 40s and 50s category. So here are just more examples of age structure pyramids. And again, maybe the projected age structure pyramid. So in the Netherlands, by 2050, they're hoping the median age will be about 46.8. That means most of the people are in their 40s. Niger doesn't change much in 2050. They're still showing rapid population growth. The median age might raise a little bit, meaning people are living a little bit longer, but their population is still growing. Another video on age structure pyramids that I'll let you guys watch on your own. Birth and death rates where you live. You might find this interesting to look at your current location using this website to find the birth and death rate where you live. Factors that affect population growth are migration. This is the relocation of humans, whether it's immigration, moving in, and emigration, exiting, moving out. And we have pull factors, which encourage people to move into a certain area, which you can read there, and push factors, which usually push people out of a certain area. And the net migration rate is just the difference between the two. And you can see here the net migration rate in the world's wealthiest countries versus the world's poorest countries. The world's poorest countries are showing a negative because that means people want to leave them or are leaving them. And the wealthiest countries are showing a positive net migration rate because people are coming into those countries due to the possibility of a better lifestyle. So this is a group of people fleeing their hometown. Thomas Malthus observed population growth in American colonies, and he noted human exponential growth. And he's one who predicted problem from growth. Too much human population growth will diminish the well-being and increase poverty. Population forecasts, the UN predicts by 2050, there will be about 9 billion people. These are the United Nations forecast. Obviously compare it to others' forecasts. And these are the years needed for population to double from the actual census data and the forecasted or predicted population. Looking at forecasting populations is important for planning purposes to know how many schools to build in a certain community, what type of roads to build, kind of how many hospitals to put there, how we should plan for Social Security and retirement. So there's a lot of good things to learn about forecasting the population. There are issues with traditional forecast models because they're too deterministic based on the estimates of birth and death. Family planning is an effort to manage the birth rate by educating women and men about family planning methods. Some countries are growing too fast where there's resource pressures like China and India, and others are growing too slow, such as Japan, Spain, Italy, and others. They don't have enough people to work in their factories or in other parts of their economy. In 1974, the UN shifted from family planning to economic development, and a reduction of birth rate is seen with economic development and educational opportunities for women. Basically, if you give women an education, they'll go and get a job. They'll still have children, but probably after they work for several years, and they might not have as many. Aging populations. Populations are increasing with the 65 plus age class, the baby boomers. In developed countries with high life expectancy and low fertility rates, some issues with this are that these people are retiring, so there's shrinking workforce. There's less people who are working, which is good for us if you want to get a job, and reduced revenues for elderly support because there aren't as many people working. They aren't paying into the Social Security fund. Two approaches to managing population growth, and this has to do with your course assignment number 2. You'll look at what China did. They had a policy to only have one kid, and they did greatly reduce their population. It was maybe seen as a little extreme, and their sex ratio has been skewed now with more males, and now they're dealing with an aging population, and they don't really have the people to help take care of them. India, the campaign encouraged postponement of marriage and children, so it was a little drastic. Then China, their approach worked, but not as quickly as China's, obviously, because China said right away you can only have one kid, and India was a little slower. They just encouraged postponing marriage and children. So this is showing married women, their ages under modern contraception, and obviously their total fertility rate will decrease. Showing how educating women can lower birth rates. And this is a picture in China, kind of highlighting this idea of just having one child when they were working through their one-child policy. This is showing China and India and their birth rates and how they declined using their 2 different family planning methods. And the UN specifically has a fund for population activities, and their focus is to gather population data, deliver healthcare to women, and encouraging gender equality and empowerment through their education and government participation. And you can see here how, especially among high school students, the birth rates have decreased by encouraging education among women. Here's the ecological footprint, which measures the amount of land needed to supply the demand for all the ecological services. So every country has an ecological footprint, and every country has a larger or a smaller ecological footprint. The US has a pretty big ecological footprint because they need a lot of land needed to supply demand for all of our ecological goods and services because we are such a consumeristic society. So this is where we get into sustainability and carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the size of population the environment can support. And as population approaches the carrying capacity, the death rates will increase and the birth rates will decrease because the sustainability of humans must be below that carrying capacity. And the ecological footprint describes the amount of land needed to supply these resources. So it goes directly hand in hand with sustainability. Here's the ecological footprint of the US versus Mexico and Haiti. Granted, our ecological footprint is larger because we also have a ton of people, but it's obviously Mexico has a ton of people and we are still much larger than that. Here is a look at kind of the ecological footprint and the different goods and services that different countries require based on if they're poor, developing, or wealthy. And the carbon footprint of a wealthy country is extremely large versus the footprint of Eritrea, which is a poor country. Their big impact on the environment is grazing land. Human resource use, the biocapacity is the area and quality of land to supply the resources. This looks at biocapacity creditors and debtors. So if their footprint is greater than the biocapacity, or if the biocapacity is greater than the footprint. So you obviously want to be in the biocapacity debtor, where your you want to be in the creditor where your biocapacity is greater than your footprint. That just means that your environmental area that you live in is greater than what you're using from the land. So you can see here the US, countries in Africa. Countries in Africa are biocapacity debtors because they use a lot of grazed land. China is also a debtor. They're probably the #1 debtor because of all the amount of carbon emissions they emit into the air. But countries in South America, Canada, Russia, not much is in Russia anyway, those will all be creditors. Here's a look at an IPAT equation, which you should know. This impacts environmental globally using affluence and technology. This will determine human impact. So I stands for the impact, and that will be equal to the population times the affluence, which is the individual consumption, times technology. And this will give us an environmental impact taking into account these 3 factors. And you should know this equation and what each letter stands for. Here's again a look at the present. The world population is greater than 7.5 billion. By 2035, the world population about 9 billion. And in the future, the world population could be about 14 billion if no changes in lifestyles or behavior are taken. And that's the end of chapter 5. Thanks for listening.